there's a really big issue with people who are, let me rephrase, we're in a illiberal moment in the sense that one party in America is, I would say, definitively illiberal, the Republican Party now. So anyone who has liberal ideals or liberal whatever has to be in the Democratic Party. Now, part of that means having to, make alliances that aren't amazing or whatever. But it also means having very clear understandings of what ideologies are compatible with not. If the Democratic Party is now the current vessel for American liberalism, that doesn't mean that leftists should be invited to the party. And by leftists, I'm referring to people who are so left that they're not in the Democratic coalition anymore by nature of not being liberals. This is like Hassan Piker, who's a self-avowed Marxist-Leninist. So this stupid conversation that's happened recently with Pisco and Hutch, the Lib and Learn podcast, which at this point has become, as far as I'm aware, a definitive streamer liberal podcast. These guys are all seemingly kind of ideologically confused when it comes to like what is and isn't liberalism, who is a liberal, but whatever. So the short of it is that they had Taylor Lorenz on, who is a tech journalist, whatever, and they had this long debate about the term centrist. And Pisco then, I guess, to recover his position, so he's more progressive. I wouldn't say he's illiberal, but he's a very progressive guy. He did this tweet thread, and let's just read through it, and then we can maybe talk about what's wrong with it. The Centrist Files. This is a breaking story. We have uncovered irrefutable evidence the term centrist is sometimes used to denote a moderate or someone who's a Democrat with moderate views. This will silence the delusional haters who claim otherwise. So already we're getting into some issues here where a moderate or someone who is a Democrat with moderate views. So that can mean that part of the issue with ideology is that people have to use somewhat similar terms. It's undeniable that people mean different things when they say centrist or moderate. So I usually like to err on the side of caution. When we're talking about intra-ideological disagreements, like a disagreement of two liberals with each other or a disagreement of two Marxists with each other, I think you can be really generous with words having different meanings. And you can say, what's more important is how the person uses the word or whatever, and then argue at that point. That stuff breaks down when you try to go outside your ideology, because then you have nothing to ground anything. So I think for liberals, it's undeniable. People mean different things when they say centrist. Now, I think some of that's intentional in a malicious way. Like when Tim Pool calls himself a centrist, it's to obscure his political positions. It's to make him seem more moderate than he actually is. But let's say generously, let's talk about someone who's referring to centrist as an actual centrist. What does that mean to, I think, a reasonable person? Does it denote a moderate or someone who is a Democrat with moderate views? I think there's an interesting conversation to have there, because what is a moderate? It changes a lot. For instance, I would argue right now that there are no moderates outside of the Republican or the Democratic Party, because there are no other liberal parties in America right now that have elected officials in places of power. But a lot of people disagree with that. A lot of people would say, like a Trump voter who is very left to the Republican Party but likes Trump, that person could be a moderate by common definition. So I'll try to be generous to that, but it seems like Pisco is almost in the position I am at this first part where he says a Democrat is a Democrat with moderate views. Like, I would say right now, I hate the word centrist. I don't think it means anything, but I think there are people who agree with that definition. But so let's see how he builds out the argument, because there's a way this can work, but I don't think it does with how he starts. So the worst part. So we start with the dictionary definition. But just be clear, if you're ever talking about political terms, the worst thing you can do is go and go to a dictionary. It's just not good. Now, if you go to a authoritative academic source, a popular poli-sci textbook, a commonly referenced political treatise that's from relatively recent times, or a definition that perhaps several scholars agree with. That's a much better way to start. The dictionary thing it's the lowest level, like you're just trying to win an argument. It's debate perpetuity. It's crazy. A dictionary is just telling you the common usage of a word relative to the average person at a certain time in history. It's why originalists have to go back to dictionaries from the past and not dictionaries from today, because the words are ephemeral. So he notes, so these websites, these dictionaries, Merriam-Webster, Oxford, whatever, they use moderate as a synonym for centrist. Collins defines centrist as a person with moderate political opinions and policies. Okay. So the problem is, let me actually change my scene for this just to make sure. Okay. The problem with this is that, let's dig into this a little bit. A person with moderate political opinions and policies. What that could mean is, say you have this as your liberal left-right, and this is the right, and this is the left. Then you would argue a moderate is someone with either a constellation of views, meaning that they could be someone like they have opinions here, and they have opinions here, and they have opinions here, but also here, and there's something that unifies them. An example of this might be a Catholic who's pro-life, but is also pro-Medicaid for all. So this person, in that sense, will have opinions that are on a left-right axis, right? Where if you make this again, the pro-life could be right here, and the pro-Medicare for all could be right here. And that might make them a moderate in that point. But notice how now this sort of moderate, that's not really a centrist, right? Because their opinions aren't in the center. They're kind of all over the place, but that's what makes them a moderate, in the sense that to resolve those differences, to be able to unify these things, they have to actually come to a more moderate perspective. They have to compromise somewhere. This is why it's a little weird to describe this, because in the past, you might have had, I don't know how to, I don't know how to erase this easily. But like in the past, you might have had someone where it was not the same thing, where most moderates, and I think this is where this term comes from, back in the more like Intra-party era, where you have a relative coherence between the Republicans and Democrats, you probably did have a lot of people truly in this range where the majority of their opinions are clustered around here. So this would be someone who's a centrist in the old style of the word, because when both parties have similar fundamentals, but you're just kind of like in between them, that's what a centrist would mean. It means, but importantly, and this is what Pisco is missing in the way that this term has changed, it means that you could go either way. This is a swing voter, in that the fundamentals between the Republicans and the liberals, or the Democrats, are going to be close enough that you don't have to compromise fundamentals to go to one side or another. And the reason why total ends will use centrist in a negative way is exactly for that reason, because it makes you think about the person as not a Democrat, but as a Republican in waiting. And at a different period of time, this made more sense. During the Reagan era, for instance, when you had a pretty ubiquitous shared values of what would eventually be called neoliberalism, it meant that you could have people in that sort of this dynamic where you could have a person who could easily vote for a Republican one election cycle and a Democrat the next, because those fundamentals are so similar that being in the center truly meant you're kind of in between the party line. Okay. But it's not really like, so this is what I mean, where this might be a definition somewhere, but not only does it not mean anything necessarily, but when we go into the political moment, and by the political moment, I mean the last 10 years at least, so not recently, you don't have this description. So we're already starting rocky, like very rocky. Then we go to Tim Miller. I despise Tim Miller more than anyone in politics, probably, at least in the Democratic Party side. But let's see what Tim Miller sees it. Tim Miller, referring to a third way, which is I would say moderate in the historical sense, or center left part of the Democratic Party think tank. Describes him as the centrist wing of the Democratic Party in first clip, and gives suggestions to centrists in the party in the second clip, which he uses a synonym for moderates, in context clearly referring to centrist Democrats. And again, I think part of my issue with Tim Miller doesn't, like, he's never been with it, kind of. Tim Miller, remember, is the Jeb guy. I think someone like Tim Miller, generously to him, I despise him, but to be generous, I think he does believe in this notion of a centrist, this Reagan Republican, this Reagan dynamic that I'm describing here. This is like a real thing to him still. It's not a real thing to me. I think it's been eviscerated, but it's a real thing to him. So that's what he means by that, I think. So yes, okay, we're continuing on that path. Like, I understand what he's saying, but again, centrist for him is then just a stand-in for center-left liberal politics. So not center in terms of the party dynamic, because there is no liberal option in the Republican Party. So it's exclusively intra-party here. Policy of America, these guys are crazy. So like, these guys are, I don't know if they're bad faith or what, I don't know their deal. Maybe it's resentment at being kicked out of the political infrastructure after the Obama sphere didn't really produce the fruits it was supposed to. But these guys poison the well against anyone that is not extremely progressive. So let's the examples. Dem strategist Alex Bell acknowledging Abigail Spanberger has been put into the moderate or centrist buckets. So again, Abigail Spanberger has already had a ridiculous amount of what would be considered in the majority of the country progressive legislation signed. So like, that's a moderate Dem already is strange. But let's even go across it. Yes, moderate and centrist oftentimes used synonymously. I'd agree. But here's the question too. Are they saying this in a negative way? Was Tim Miller saying this in a negative way? Were they painting centrist as a negative pejorative? I don't think so all the time. Now, Favreau might, because I know he dislikes a decent amount of the Schumer wing of the party now. But again, centrist is relational. Center to what? Center to the party, like center left, or center to the political dynamic? Can you really say someone like is a centrist in the Democratic Party and they're centrist in the sense that they're centered to the entire political dynamic? That would be saying that they're centered to Republicans, that there's a way, like I said in this graphic, where they can jump over, where they can make that jump. Are any of these people in that category? Now here's Ezra Klein. It's awesome. In the context of the 2020 Democratic primary, referring to a centrist electorate. In a conversation with Jared Abbott, the notion of centrist Democrat is raised. What I actually find interesting about this, and it kind of undercuts what Pisco seems to be saying, I think the reason why we can refer to it as the electorate as centrist is I think that Reagan dynamic that I'm describing here, I think it still exists for a lot of voters. The actual proper voters seem to have this sort of like liberal axis still, but the Republican Party doesn't, which we all agree. So again, this is a little weird. What are we saying? Again, to Dan Saltman, and I'm sorry to this guy. I heard enough of Dan Saltman's stuff. Not a dumb guy, but not the most politically savvy, I would say. Calling Bill Clinton a centrist and moderate. Again, for the time, yes, he represented the third way, but it was because, again, Bill Clinton is the perfect example because he literally got people to jump from the Reagan wing of the Republican Party, the moderates of the Republican Party, into being Democratic voters. That was the whole point, that his views were resolvable with the right at the time. But again, it's temporal. It's related to the time. Go to pondering politics in the context of centrists and moderates as part of the Democratic coalition and contrasting to the Republicans in the shutdown fight. Again, this is again, like this is a can of worms where it's like, what? Like maybe what are we really? Let's like watch this clip. You know,
for primaries you, if they show that they have more backbone than you, we're going to vote for them. We're going to hold this against you. Now, obviously, all of these people are still preferable to Republicans, and obviously, the bulk of the blame is still on the Republicans, right? It was the 53 Republicans who are primarily responsible for the situation, but they couldn't have gotten this done without the 8 Democratic defectors. And so we can't do this anymore. It doesn't matter if you're a centrist or a moderate or a progressive or a leftist or whatever. We need candidates who, regardless of their policy preferences, will fight. We need moderates who will fight.
Again, but this seems like we're talking relationally. We're talking intra-Democrat. Now, again, is centrist the best word to use? I would disagree, but he's saying centrist in a positive way. He's saying centrist as people in a coalition, in a party, who will fight together, who will be strong together. Okay, so it's still relational at least. It's still intra-party. Best word choice? No, but clearly centrist and moderate in this video are referring to people who are center left or moderate relative to the Democratic Party. It's intra-party. There are many more examples that, if further challenged, I can post, including my latest combo with Hutch. The evidence is overwhelming. The term centrist is sometimes used to describe Democrats. The term centrist is often used as a synonym with moderate. Stay mad. Okay, so we actually don't get anything. We actually don't address the claim. So this is supposed to demonstrate that it's sometimes used to denote a moderate. Like, yeah, no one would disagree with that. It can sometimes denote that. It's a question of what does it mean relationally? What is it saying? And if we go to the topic of this, the person who we were referring to, who used this term pejoratively, and she used this term pejoratively for a woman, Olivia Giuliana, who I also am not a huge fan of, so it's not me playing party politics at all. But when Taylor says centrist, what does she mean? Agreed, but both Trump and Mamdani promised are promising economic populism. A centrist liberal could replicate Zoran's exact content strategy and still lose because their policy platform is fundamentally unpopular. Okay, so that one is relationally whatever. Clarkson, leftists hate Crockett. Leftists are literally the ones against her. Centrist blue MAGA Democrats are seething. So here, Taylor is actually agreeing with me in the sense that she sees it as exactly that. A centrist is someone who can jump off at some point. They have that entryway. She calls them blue MAGA because she thinks they are on that axis together. She agrees that what Republicans are doing is still on the political axis of Democrats. That's the entire contention. So when she calls Olivia Giuliani, so if we go back here, what does she say in response to this? Now, I'm not a fan of this person. I don't think she's very politically savvy, blah, blah, blah. But now she responds. So Olivia Giuliani calls herself a moderate Democrat. Notice now she's not calling herself a centrist or a moderate, because I think even someone with not amazing political acumen, but who is aware of the moment, knows it is relational only intra-party right now. That's the entire point. So when she does this, she's explicitly saying, it's a Democrat thing. It's a liberal thing. It has to be. So let's go to the actual post. Being moderate means being center of the left, not a centrist. A centrist is someone who's literally in the center. I am not, which is exactly this. It's someone who can break away. That's all it is. I would never vote for a Republican. I have voted in primaries for DSA endorsed candidates. Again, saying like this is already disqualified as a centrist because you're someone who is so far left relative to the party that when you say you have moderate views, it just means relationally to policy, but you are a partisan. This is a partisan. A partisan necessarily cannot be a centrist because a partisan is never abandoning the political party. And if they are, they've become a different partisan. They've never been a centrist. They just shifted at that point. So Unlike hyper online weirdos, I actually liked voting for people who care about doing their job and can win and don't have a rigid, immovable ideology. This is what I mean, where I think it's a very telling thing for not just Pisco, but the kind of faction that he represents in the online left and why it can't get anything done, why it can't really rise to the moment, the occasion, is because they don't understand ideology. They don't understand the moment. And these nuances seem like semantics. They seem silly. They seem like nothing. But there's a lot to it. There's actually a lot going on there, because if you don't think about what do these terms mean, what do the semantics actually apply to, you can make this huge miscalculation where you think that when Taylor Lenz calls this woman a centrist, that she means the same thing as when this woman calls herself a moderate. It's psychotic. It's crazy. It's a crazy thing. But I think it's either a lack of knowledge or intentionally malicious. It has to be one of the two.